months ago, a couple months ago, called Talking Clean and Acting Dirty.
Amen.
So let me get on with this. Moving to clean energy. Right now, only about 7 or 8% of our energy comes from renewables. And if we look at the fact that we're still mostly hooked on dirty energy, even though the potentials, as was presented earlier, are really great. And solar and wind potentially have the greatest potential for moving us to a green and clean energy future. But again, it's not profitable for big oil companies.
Amen.
So let's be clear. If we look at energy use in the United States, the biggest part of the producers of greenhouse gases is CO2. Two major sectors. It's electricity generation and transportation. If you look at transportation, it's about 33% of all the greenhouse gases come from transportation, cars, buses, trucks, from emissions. And about 40%, almost 41% of the greenhouse gases come from electricity generation. So if you add those two components, you got over 73% of our CO2. So if you look at investment in clean energy, changing the way that we heat our buildings and cool our buildings and our homes and schools, etc., and how we move from point A to point B, vis-a-vis cars versus train, buses, etc., then we're talking about low-hanging fruit. Now, if you look at this, the fact that, as I said, about 8% of our renewables our energy comes from renewable. Half of that 8% of renewables is in one particular component, biomass. Biomass, incineration, isn't it? Biomass electric plant or power plant is nothing more than an incinerator. You're burning something, not the most efficient thing, and not the most, it's not the cleanest. So let's be real. When we talk about which states is moving to coming up with a renewable energy portfolio, if you look at the southern United States and you look at the green states are the states that have taken the initiative to move forward to come up with strategies to go green. And look at the states that are not green, that are not white. You see a definite regional bias. The southeast and southern states. There's a southern bias there. So I think there's a lot we have to do to organize our elected officials and our community organizations and the NAACP folks to talk about we need to have a much more aggressive program to get our elected officials to talk about, well, more than talk, to actually move to force these issues on the table. So as I said before, the low-hanging fruit that we can actually do something about right now is electricity generation and transportation. And if we talk about transportation, for example, or you look at power gen, most of the power that we use, it comes from, as I said, electricity generation, transportation, our commercial buildings. So you divide it up. If we look at where it comes from, where we use it, we saw that slide already with Jackie. We look at this footprint. How much carbon we use and where is it distributed? And you see all these numbers, transport, you talk about clothes and recreation, etc. All communities don't have the same footprint. And you saw that big graph that Jackie had. African Americans, for example, have a smaller carbon footprint than the rest of the country. And this is not rocket science, there's a reason for that. We have a 20% smaller footprint, yet our communities have to bear a much greater burden of the externalities, the negative side of a bad energy policy. We got more power plant, dirty coal-fired power plants in our community. We got more, we live next to a lot of these petrochemical plants, refineries, etc. At the same time, we don't have a lot of we don't have a lot of big houses that we have to heat and cool. Our houses are smaller. We're not likely to own cars. We're more likely to ride transit. We're more likely to walk. So when we talk about our footprint, that means that if we're to move to a green energy future, that means that people who have the most have to give up the most. But as it stands now, African Americans, our community is being asked to respond in the same way as the rest of society. And when you look at some of the maps, I'm going to show you the fact that here in Texas, the first biomass energy plant to be built in Texas, the first, and we know that there are very few cases where black people are the first to get the best of the best first. And so when we talk about this biomass plant, the first one to be built in Texas is being built in Lufkin, in North Lufkin, in the middle of the black community that already has lots of polluting facilities. So this biomass is being hailed as green energy, as clean energy. But when you factor in the fact that if you're going to bring all these wood chips, bring them in on a train or bring them in on trucks, this is the one in Lufkin. It's low crater right across from the community. This thing's going to be burning all kinds of wood chips, and the chips going to be coming in diesel trucks. Fumes. So when we talk about green energy, let's be very clear that we have to start questioning. And right now, biomass is being sold as clean and green, and almost in Georgia, in my state, we did the analysis of Georgia. You know, you're talking about 75% of all the plants, biomass plants are being built in Georgia or in black communities. So if it's a rush to go green, why isn't it distributed in a way that you would think, oh, not rocket science. So when we look at the issue of dirty power plants and the fact that 78% of African Americans in this country live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant compared to 56% of whites. So when we talk about who's most likely to live near these coal plants and the fact that we're hooked on coal, the fact that there's no such thing as clean coal, the fact is that when you have coal ash, and the ash has to go somewhere. There's so many coal ash sites located around the country. Remember 2 years ago when that coal ash TVA had that spill in Roane County, Tennessee, East Tennessee, 95% white county. When they needed to send that coal ash somewhere, they picked a county that was predominantly black, 300 miles south. So when we talk about this fantasy of coal being clean, it's not clean. It's not clean when it comes out the ground. The fact that we're moving more to this dirty coal plants. Look at the dirty dozen, the dirtiest 12 coal-fired power plants in the country. There are, let's see, in terms of Texas, there are 5 in Texas. In my state, there are 2. So you can look at this, also a regional bias in terms of where these bad apples are. And so when we talk about the fact that lots of people die each year because of coal, bad air, and if you talk about the fact that what happens when at the smokestack, mercury, lead, arsenic, the stuff comes out of the air, pollutes, falls into the water streams. A lot of our folks fish from these streams and rivers. They're not anglers, they eat the fish. And so when we talk about mercury and the impact on families, and particularly pregnant women, and we talk about the excess deaths due to air pollution from dirty coal-fired power plants. So there are lots of reasons why we should be moving to clean energy other than the sexy topic of going green. So it's about health also. So when we talk about energy apartheid in Georgia, for example, my state, and I think we need to do this for every state where there's an NAACP chapters and branches to look at what's happening in the state and where are these plants that are being proposed. Like in Georgia, there are 3 coal-fired power plants that are being proposed in Georgia. All all three of them are in mostly black counties. You say, well, what's with that? While we're talking green, but we're actually acting dirty. And so when we look at mountaintop coal ash, and we look at the fact that, I already talked about that, I'm sorry. We look at the fact that, okay, let me back up. Nuclear, here's another one. Right now, the nuclear power industry is reinventing itself. Now they're talking about, we're non-greenhouse gas producing. We're now clean energy. Well, when did that happen? I think the fact that the nuclear power industry, there are like 21 facilities that are being proposed, power plants. But the first one to come, and this is where they're located across the country. And again, if we look at the location of these power plants, there has not been a nuclear power plant built in this country in 30 years. The federal government gave Southern Company, based in Georgia. Southern Company has two of the dirtiest coal power plants, the Dirty 12. The first proposals to have two power plants being built, they're being built in, nuclear power plants being built in Burke County, Georgia, a county that is predominantly black, and a little community called Shell Bluffs community, So the idea is that you're going to give them $8 billion to this big electric power company, $8 billion loan guarantee. And the first thing they're going to use is to jumpstart the nuclear industry on the backs of this little black community. And so I think the idea is to say, well, if it's so great, why isn't it that black people are the first one to get two? This community already has two nuclear power plants. So now it's going to get forward. You say, well, what is with that? Most of the people in that community, very few of the people in that community work at that power plant. This is high-tech stuff. So when we talk about where's the waste going, it's not so clean. The waste is going, most of the waste on nuclear power plants stored on site. And there's no place off site to store it. Yucca Mountain was the proposed place, but it hasn't happened yet. So when we talk about the waste from power plants, the waste from accidents, the waste from BP spill. Let me get to the BP spill. When we had the BP spill, the mess got cleaned up. People said, where's all the waste going? We asked the government that question, and the government said it's going to landfills. We said, where are the landfills? They said, well, it's 9 landfills. We said, they said, we don't know where the landfills are. And so I got busy in my office. We basically tracked exactly where the landfills are. 60% of the waste that's being cleaned up from BP spill is going into landfills located in mostly black communities. 60%. When you look at the percentage of African Americans who live in those coastal counties in Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, it's only 26%. But you're getting 60% of the waste. That is disparate impact. And so when you look at the fact that 80% of all the waste that's being disposed after that spill is going into communities where there's a percentage of low-income families and communities of color that's greater than the percent in the county or the parish. These are environmental justice communities. And so when you look at that distribution, we say, well, the fact that accidents occur, even when you don't have accidents, the fact that you have a disproportionate amount of the negative impacts from risky kinds of energy production being located in communities of color. And in Florida, for example, there's one facility in Florida, one landfill in Florida, in Campbellton, Florida, that receives almost a third of the waste. It's a little black community, almost a third. You say, well, what's with that? This is a landfill that's designed for household garbage, banana peels. Now it's getting toxic waste from a oil spill. And so when we talk about the waste and we talk about the negative impacts of landfills, the dust, and the impact of diesel, birds, we talk about health impacts, the psychological impact of not knowing what's in the landfill, if it will leak, if it will contaminate the groundwater, if the dust is coming off the facility, all of that, anxiety. And so when we talk about the fact that if we're to have a green economy and a green and clean future and a sustainable and healthy community, then that means we have to address these legacy issues. The fact that all communities do not receive the same amounts of green, clean energy. And poor people, regardless of what color, receive less of this, whether it's solar panels, or whether it's wind energy, or whether it's subsidies. I mean, it's like if you don't own a house, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for you to itemize. I mean, there are tax shelters for middle-income folks and affluent folks that are not available to low-income people. And so, to advance a policy for addressing these disparities, for providing for incentives to subsidize, buildings, to fix schools that are in our communities that are sick, and to green the schools, and to green the buildings, whether it's public housing or whether it's low-income housing. You save money in the long run by people having smaller heating bills and cooling bills and having buildings that are healthier. And finally, I think for anybody who wants to know more about what we do at our center, you can contact us vis-a-vis our email address or our website. We have lots of information. We work with lots of communities. I've been doing this stuff for at least 3 decades. And I think it's important that we have the NAACP leading the charge to ensure that whatever policies we come up with in terms of climate policies, that they be equitable, that we get benefits and not always have to suffer the burdens. We get benefits from programs that are designed to weatherize our homes, to reduce our electric bills, to get our access to clean and affordable transit, and not just build roads and highways to nowhere. And to get, if we build out Detroit, then Detroit should be making more than just cars. It should be making more transit. It should be making trains and light rails and those things that can get cities moving again. We should also make sure that our public transit systems do not basically fall apart and basically services are cut. 95% of the transit systems in this country are either cutting services or we're raising fares. African Americans are 6 times more likely to use transit. We're more likely not to have a car, not to drive. And so those things make it important that we connect the dots. We connect the dots in terms of how housing, transportation, energy use, land use, getting people to understand how all these things are connected, and making sure that our organizations as well as our elected officials understand and are accountable. Thank you very much.